you based, Josh? Are you in New York or?
Right now, I'm in Brooklyn. I'll be back in Pennsylvania tomorrow.
Okay.
So that.
Okay. Good evening. This is Mark McNaught from Independence Live. In the wake of the Scottish moratorium on fracking, I have the great pleasure to invite Mr. Josh Fox. For those of you who don't know, he is the producer of Gasland and Gasland 2, which arguably has done more than any other media event or film to reveal what fracking actually means. We hear a lot about how it's driving down the supply the price of gas, how it's helping creating jobs. But when you look when you watch Josh's movies, you have a much deeper appreciation of the very real environmental impact of not only on the water supplies and others, but also on property values and these types of things. So just to get going, Josh, for those of you who are, for those of our listeners or viewers who are unaware, if you could just give a brief summary of how you got in this business, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, first of all, for that introduction. This all happened to me kind of out of the blue in the same way that I think it happened to millions of other people around the globe. I live in the Upper Delaware River Basin, which is a fancy way of saying the Delaware River watershed. And that is the border of the two great states of Pennsylvania and New York, the Upper Delaware is. And that is where about 16 million people get their water from. In New York City, in Philadelphia, and southern New Jersey, they draw water from that watershed, and that water is pure. It's pristine. It's a beautiful area. It's a wildlife area. It's forests, streams, tributaries, the river itself. And I live on the Pennsylvania side. So different entreaties from the take it very seriously. My father looked at these pieces of paper. He goes, "What is this? This looks like a scam. Figure this out." Because they were offering these huge amounts of money to lease our land. And we had never heard of it. There'd never been anything like this in the past in the Delaware River Basin. So it was kind of like an alien landing in the backyard. But as time went on, it became more and more serious that this was real, that natural gas companies and oil companies.
And very quickly, about what year did you?
This was 2008.
2000.
This was in February of 2008
Yeah.
Through April, May of 2008. And it started to become more and more serious that people all around me were leasing for drilling and fracking, this new word called fracking. We'd never heard of fracking. What is fracking? Didn't sound very good. And so neighbors of mine were, it's a very ugly word. As we ended up finding out that word that's very appropriate for what the process is. Hydraulic fracking entails drilling down very deep to the substrata and actually fracturing the underground layers in shales or sandstones.
Is that done with actual? I wanted to get just for our viewers, just a little bit of a kind of a layman's explanation, because I've heard different versions. And when do they send explosives down there? How do they?
Well, yes and no. So what happens is you're drilling down, and new drilling technology, you can also drill vertically. Yeah. So horizontally. So you drill down and then horizontally, and then you send down that drill pipe, what are called perforation caps, and those are explosives that they blast a hole in your drilling pipe, and then you inject water, 2 to 9 million gallons of water, laced with toxic chemicals and with sand, at such high pressure that you actually fracture the substrata, that you break the rock, and those fractures then release trapped bubbles of gas that are inside of this geology. Now that all sounds like incredible, brand new technology, and it is. It's kind of astounding that we can do this. The problem is that when you drill through the top layers, where you have your aquifers, your groundwater, which is anywhere between 400 and 1,200 feet, you're introducing a connective layer from down there, where you've pumped all these chemicals into the ground at very high pressure. You've also liberated oil and gas and probably other things that are down there that nature has separated out in order for us to have humans, like normally occurring radioactive material, other volatile organic compounds. And all of this comes bubbling to the surface in a mix of chemicals and gas and oil and other things that are toxic to life. and the companies are very poorly regulated. The gas wells leak. You only have about an inch worth of cement that's insulating the side of those pipes. That cracks and breaks down really rapidly. So everywhere the industry goes, and this is what I was learning back in 2008, that there were reports in Pennsylvania and in Colorado and in Texas of people's water that had gone bad, that they had oil in their water, that they had gas in their water, that they had chemicals in their water. And I needed to find out what was going on, because basically the oil and gas companies said, look, this is perfectly environmentally sound. All you're going to have at the end of the day is a fire hydrant, like in the middle of your field. They didn't let on that this is thousands of truck trips per gas well, access roads, pipelines, compressor stations, volatile organic compound exposure in the air 24 hours a day, that if you live near this, people who were complaining of a recurring health problem, and that it could foul your groundwater. None of that stuff was what the industry wasn't saying any of that. But neighbors of mine who were researching the process were coming back with those reports. So I, as a filmmaker, decided that I wanted to go out on the road and investigate and see what was happening out there in the areas that were being fracked all across the United States. And we were at the time when this was being proposed to us in PA and in New York, we were in the middle of a 32-state drilling boom. More drilling and fracking was going on in 2008 that had happened. The largest natural gas domestic expansion in history, basically. So I went around the country, and the first Gasland film, which ended up being accepted in the Sundance Film Festival, and then picked up by HBO, and then nominated for an Oscar and won an Emmy, and all these amazing things. Couldn't believe that these things had happened to what was truly a very independent project. That film is really an investigation of what happened to people on the ground, and of course the phenomenon of people being able to light their water on fire got a lot of media attention. Right out of the kitchen sink, in drilling and fracking areas, you've got people who can put a cigarette lighter to their tap, and boom, you have ignition. And that's in the film, and those are very famous clips you can see on YouTube, and you can see on it.
Certainly have. That's certainly the most iconic image I have, I think, in anybody who's watched that film. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, these were the things that the oil industry was hiding from people. And in this moment of incredibly expanded energy consumption, and really the emergence of rival energy technologies, which are in the renewable energy sector, the fossil fuel industries are desperate to find new sources and to convince people to go ahead and do, which is really counterintuitive, which is to industrialize and contaminate the places where they live. So we began a long campaign to try to educate people. I have to clean my glasses. For some reason, I just realized they're so dirty. We began a campaign to educate people across the world with the Gasland films. I went on tour to 300 different cities across the United States and across Europe and Australia, South Africa, showing the film, talking to people who were starting these grassroots groups against fracking. One of the places that we visited with the second film, Gasland 2, was in Scotland. My producer is Scottish. She's my best friend, Deborah Wallace, and she was one of the two producers.
You interviewed her. She's a delightful woman.
Oh, you did? Right, cool. She's amazing. But what has happened in these last six years is one of the most incredible grassroots expansion of environmental campaigning that we've ever seen in history. And that has resulted now in quite a few victories. We won a full ban on fracking in France. We've won in the Netherlands. We won in Ireland. And I think most emotional to me is this win in New York State, which has a huge amount of shale, a huge amount of potential immediate income, as of course, in my view, a huge amount of potential contamination and degradation. And we just won. We just won a total ban on fracking in New York State, which was based on the science. Yeah. What's happening now is look, when I was going out in 2008, 2009, there was very little actual science that had been brought to bear on this question. There were anecdotal stories from residents in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Arkansas. People were saying our lives have been ruined, our health has been ruined, our land has been ruined, but not a lot of epidemiology, not a lot of real groundwater studies. In the last 6 years, you've seen an explosion of peer-reviewed science on this, being brought to bear on this question. So much so now that we have one peer-reviewed paper coming out per day. And we have over 400, and you can look them up at a database called Physicians, Scientists, and Engineers for Healthy Energy. You can see the list, and they all basically confirm what we reported in Gasland and what the citizens were saying in those films. and then the multiple other outfits that started to report on fracking.
Okay. Thanks.
So that's the story, long story.
But
what's amazing now is that governments are starting to pay attention.
Yeah,
in Scotland.
absolutely. Yeah, from what I understand, I mean, I'm just trying to go through what in the UK experience. I'm not an expert, but you know, because I've been following this as closely as I can, reading through the Guardian and other relatively respectable newspapers, and we knew that for example there were certain companies like Quadrilla and other that were very interested in, and they had portioned off these different areas of Great Britain and Scotland.
With a name like Quadrilla, how could it possibly be bad?
No. And I think it's George Osborne, the Exchequer's dad, is into it, and Lord Brown, who was former head of BP, is the head of Quadrilla. I mean, there's just conflict of interest.
I just watched a wonderful piece by Russell Brand on fracking. If you haven't seen it, I will send you the link.
Okay.
It's really, really hilarious. It
okay.
goes into a lot of the ways.
Post it afterwards on the site. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, but you can see the same things. It's like they saw what happens within regulatory, and they knew, as you pointed out, that they had to be kind of a British equivalent of the Halliburton loophole, so they didn't actually have to expose these techniques to actual, environmental quality things. And so, they do things like say, oh, we've got the most robust rules on fracking and all this. And, and they just had a vote. And so the awareness has definitely risen. And there was I think they tried to drill in Balcombe last year.
In Balcombe, there were earthquakes.
Yeah.
When they started drilling.
Yeah.
That's a bad sign. I mean, fracking causes earthquakes and injection wells for fracking waste. I just sent you the link to the Russell Brand thing.
Okay, thanks.
There is. Okay, this is really simple. There has been, over the last several decades, 3 decades, an effort to completely discredit science when it comes to the fossil fuel industry.
Absolutely.
Science has said to the fossil fuel industry and to the world, we are warming the climate. That's a big problem. We have to stop burning fossil fuel. The way the fossil fuel industry dealt with this information was not, oh my God, our business model could destroy the planet. We have to figure out something else. Their way of dealing with this was, oh my God, if this gets out, it's going to shut down our businesses, so we must discredit these sources, which is kind of like trying to after a point, kind of like trying to disprove gravity.
Right? Or disprove
gravity science. And so you have in government a tradition now of listening to those very influential forces and pretending that science doesn't exist. I'm sure that David Cameron has a cell phone. I'm sure that it doesn't work by magic or pixie dust or whatever they were doing at Stonehenge. I'm sure that's not how his cell phone runs. I'm sure it works on basic principles of chemistry and physics and electricity and science, which is what we're learning about climate change. And that 97% of all the science on the world says, yeah, well, humans are causing climate change. And one of the major ways we're doing that is burning fossil fuels. Enter the fracking into the picture. And now you have this fracking denialism that's added onto the climate denialism. We know so well how this works because we watched the tobacco industry do this for decades. The tobacco, we found out in the 50s, the 40s, tobacco was bad for you, it give you cancer, all these other bad things. The tobacco industry said, no, that's not true. They developed bogus science. They went into universities. They paid off research labs to prove that, to create an atmosphere of doubt.
Yeah.
And that doubt confused the public and it confused people because nobody has the time to research all this stuff. Only weird people like myself who've dedicated their lives doing things like this. It's at most, you're not going to miss your kid's Thursday night soccer game to start pouring over the research on fracking. You have to listen to the media. The media also is often confused.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, I've I watch the American media quite a bit. I've seen you on, for example, Chris Hayes quite a few times. I like his show and all that. But you also, during the commercial breaks that I get on the internet, you also have ads sponsored by those same fracking companies. And so you feel like even with a good show like Chris Hayes or something like that, you feel like they just really can't go there. They really can't, you know, give a really long report about, you know, similar to what you've done. I mean,
well, I think that Chris Hayes is an exception. MSNBC in the United States is an exception. They've been really good at reporting.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've had challenges with them, with Dylan Radigan, for example, another host, in which I had to challenge him to really pay attention on, and he did that. He went out and did more research. The point is that the fossil fuel industry is completely morally bereft. They are much more interested in manipulating you, making money. They don't care if it destroys your groundwater. They don't care if it destroys your health. They don't care if it destroys the air. They don't care if it eventually tanks the planet. They are not, they have bought into their own denialism to such a degree that they're almost living on another planet. It's very sad. It's sickening. It's psychotic. It is the way that industry is running. If I were working for the fossil fuel industry and faced with this scientific information, I think I would have to, as many people in the fossil fuel industry have, I would have to start to embark on a campaign to change these things. But what we're seeing right now is quite the opposite. The denial reaches so far in that actually Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, campaigned to get fracking stopped.
Explain a little bit more about that. I saw you explaining on Chris Hayes, and that is one of the most amazing examples. But just explain a little bit broadly about that, because he was the guy that didn't want.
There's a water tower that was being erected near Rex Tillerson's $1 million ranch somewhere in Texas.
And he's the head of Exxon. Is that right?
He's the head of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson. He entered a lawsuit to get the water tower, which was part of fracking infrastructure, to be moved somewhere else. So even he himself did not want fracking infrastructure, fracking equipment in his own backyard. Everybody else, fine. Everybody else, toxic chemicals, no problem. Noxious vapors, volatile organic compounds in the atmosphere, ground level ozone, particulate matter, no problem. We don't care. Those are your kids. Our $5 million ranch, no. And he ended up suing. And of course, the press had a field day on that. But what we're discovering here, back to the point, is that governments are really waking up. And what I think will happen with Scotland as they do this review process, and this is the right way to go about this, right? New York did this right. And it's hard to say that that's the case, because what happened was in 2008, when all this stuff started to come to me, I went out on the road and started to do my own study, based on making a movie. And New York State decided to do what's called a supplemental environmental impact study, a generic environmental impact study. So they were studying this, what fracking was. What is this? This is something new. We don't know what it is. So let's ask the citizenship what they're concerned about. There were scoping hearings. These hearings went on for 8 hours. Everyone lined up. Everybody got 2 minutes. And the public was engaged. And New York State started to create local bans on fracking. And the public got more and more alarmed. And we started to get New York City involved by talking about the New York City watershed, which was something that Chesapeake Oil and other companies wanted to lease. So awareness got raised and people started to pay attention. And there was a democratic process where New York engaged the public and engaged the science community in actually really figuring out what this question meant. And when it comes down to it, 6 years later, they discover, lo and behold, the health commissioner in New York State came out and said, you know what? I don't want my kids living near this stuff. And if it's not good enough for my kids, it's not good for anybody's kids in New York State. My answer is no. I still want to cry just even thinking about it. Because it was, in this day and age, with the amount of pounding away at our democracies that these corporations do, with the amount of misinformation and obfuscation and handshaking and lobbying and money spent, to actually have democracy work is kind of a minor miracle. So I would suggest for people in Scotland, yes, absolutely, the government is saying the right things, but you cannot back down. You have to do your part. You have to participate. You have to engage in that process to make sure, because you damn sure the oil companies are going to do it. They're the ones who are going to be in the government's ear. You have to be louder. You have to be there in greater numbers. And you have to be armed with the science and with the facts.
Also, I was wondering just what your view is just on the economics of it. I mean, I've watched different shows, and they say that when the price of oil was up at like 110 a barrel or so,
Right.
then it's profitable. But they said for fracking, it's only above I think 60 or $70. If it's below that, then fracking isn't profitable, from what I've heard.
So what happened just now? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So let me just finish and then I'll let you
Go
go. And then also that a huge amount of these companies have borrowed staggering amounts of money, different, kind of
Yes.
like the housing boom, where they sell these bonds to finance that. And so many of these companies are potentially in crippling debt, especially the smaller ones. And if the price remains low for much longer, it may, kind of wreck the economics of it. I mean, that's a wishful thinking, and it certainly doesn't obliviate anything that has already been done. But what can you say about that?
Okay, so what's happened is this, and it's very interesting. Saudi Arabia, who has the cheapest oil in the world to produce, their oil is very cheap to produce. They are the linchpin partner in OPEC, right? Mm-hmm. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Yeah. OPEC sets the price of oil internationally because they say we're going to sell oil at this much. And what that does is it protects the member companies of OPEC. So Saudi Arabia's oil is artificially inflated to kind of match the price of it coming from Ecuador or from Nigeria or from Venezuela. So Saudi Arabia has just said, screw you, OPEC, and we're out. We're going to undercut our own organization. We're going to sell our oil as cheaply as we can possibly sell it because, it's hard to know exactly why they're doing that. Some people say it's because they want to destroy the Russian oil industry. Some people because they want to destroy the American fracking oil industry. There may be some knowledge to be gained in a recent quote from the ex-Saudi oil minister who said famously, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stones. So he's saying we might end the oil age with a lot of our oil still in the ground if we let everybody else sell just like us. So it sounds like Saudi Arabia is saying we'd rather sell our oil at $20 a barrel and drain it dry than have a lot of oil left over, which is worthless in 10, 15 years when the world is fully renewable energy powered. Mm-hmm. You understand?
Yeah, yeah.
So they're shorting the market right now, and who knows how long they're going to do that for. They've done similar stuff like this before. The real message to be gained here, I believe, is if your energy base is controlled by despots, by tyrants, you're going to have tyranny, one way or the other. Yeah. Whether that tyranny is coming from Saudi Arabia and these oil sheikhs, or that tyranny is coming from Putin, right, which certainly is a good definition, or that tyranny is coming from George Bush and Dick Cheney, blowing up your entire country in Iraq, for example. If oil and tyranny kind of go hand in hand, whereas renewable energy, wind and sun, is inherently a more democratic form of energy. You're talking about distributed generation of electricity, distributed generation of power, solar panels on every rooftop, electric cars in every garage. This is something that is now much less dependent on some big grid, much, much less polluting, and more suitable to local control and local democracy. So whatever Saudi Arabia is up to, we won't know for a while whether they're going to crash. Well, and they certainly have cost the frackers a lot of money right now in terms of oil. Yeah. So we're going to see. But the bottom line is, if it's going to be Vladimir Putin or the Saudi oil family or the American oil families or Rex Tillerson, you're going to have a very tyrannical, let them eat cake, and often violent attitude towards the rest of the world so that they can exploit and keep us dependent on their product. The real revolution that's coming that really gives the legs to the fracking protest is the renewable energy revolution. Yeah. We wouldn't have a leg to stand on if we didn't know that renewable energy could serve all of our needs. Yeah. Because in
Scotland is well on its way. Yeah.
You can't say, "Oh, just turn off the lights," because you're essentially, if you're for a fracking ban without also being for renewable energy development, it's like saying, "Oh, let's turn off the lights in the middle of the hospital, in the middle of the operation." You can't do that. you have to replace the fuel. That's the real ban on fracking.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing Scotland accelerate that. We're seeing China accelerate that. We should hopefully see America. We're seeing Germany accelerate that. What's remarkable in the new climate agreement between the United States and China, and this is a fact that's underreported, China committed to building 800 to 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy in the next 15 years. Now, that's enough power to run the entire United States. So that's a fraction, that's 20% of China, or is the entire United States. So the United States could probably do the same thing, or do it in 10 years. Where's the renewable energy race? See, if China can build an entire United States worth of wind and solar, so can we here in the US. Right. So can Europe. Yeah. And that should be our timeline. It shouldn't be this 2050. It should be now, because we need to do this now. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, part of what's behind what's going on with Saudi Arabia and their oil pricing.
Okay, just quickly for your audience, if you have any questions for Josh Fox, please send them to the line, and Kevin will pass them on to us. I wanted to get more into the kind of the regulatory structure in the United States, which has allowed this to emerge. I was completely unaware of the group ALEC. Before it came out, its existence was revealed. I think it was during the Wisconsin Scott Walker's union busting thing. ALEC is a group that has hundreds, if not thousands, of different companies, and it's sort of like a dating service for Republican state legislatures throughout the country. And so it's no coincidence that you see so many states starting fracking at the same time with the same lack of any kind of regulatory structure. And how do you see it? And just try to get express to our viewers how inadequate is putting it charitably, but that these regulatory structures are, and why.
Well, this is Gasland 2 territory. This is why your question essentially was the reason why we made a second film.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet. I've seen Gasland, but I will watch Gasland 2.
It's harder to get, I think, in Europe these days. Hopefully that will change. Gasland Part 2 asked the exact same question. If there was this huge movement on the ground on fracking in a democracy, why wasn't our government paying attention? The United States has been on an extraordinarily disturbing course for quite some time now, which is to dismantle our own democratic institutions in a variety of different campaigns. A lot of them emanating from the Koch brothers, from the fossil fuel industry itself. The Supreme Court, with the Citizens United decision, decided that it was okay for corporations to have unlimited spending within elections on political ads. The Koch brothers planned in the 2016 election to spend nearly $1 billion. Now they're gonna rival the spending of our two major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And beyond just spending in political elections, you're talking about an incredible amount of influence at every level of the government, whether that's federal, state, or local. So we have 50 states. Each of those 50 states has its own Department of Environmental Protection or Department of Environmental Conservation. That's a state agency. Often it's on that state agency to permit oil and gas drilling. What we found in Gasland 2, and we point out a report from, I think it's called the Public Integrity Commission, that there was such a revolving door between people who were working for the oil and gas industry and people who were working for the Department of Environmental Protection, up to the highest levels of government, for example, in Pennsylvania. So Ed Rendell, the governor, up until 2010, he left office to take a job with a lobbying firm that represents oil and gas. The Secretary of Department of Environmental Protection, John Hanger, under Rendell, same thing, became a lawyer for a lobbying firm that represented the oil industry. Now, they are back in government. John Hanger is in the new Tom Wolf administration. So there's this revolving door, and what we have found that the oil and gas industry has such a grip on policy because they influence the players, and also because they have these tremendous spending budgets for PR and so on, but mostly because they go directly to the core of the government. and hire these people, and then you become beholden to them. That there really is no distinguishing between the oil and gas industry and the government in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. That's different in New York. New York doesn't have a legacy of oil and gas infiltration. So I think you saw a lot more independence here. But, you know, whether you're looking at the Deepwater Horizon, or you're looking at the federal government, state and local governments, there is so much influence. And the film is really an in-depth investigation into how not only is our water and our land and our air being fracked, but our governments are being fracked. Yeah. That it's as if you have a horizontal wellbore going underneath the Congress, shooting money up through the chamber and completely dismantling the relationship between people's representatives and themselves. In fact, this has gotten so bad in America that Princeton University, one of our esteemed Ivy League universities, decided to ask the question in a very scientific, sociologically specific type way, what form of government does America actually have? They just wanted to know. They didn't know. They wanted to find out. You know, they didn't want to presuppose anything. And it come back after examining all these public policy questions and how people voted and whether or not it had an impact, all this kind of stuff. Years later, they come back and say, well, turns out America is not actually a democracy. America is an oligarchy. So unless you have billions of dollars, you don't matter. Voting doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters. As it turns out, however, what does matter are movements. Movements can create change in the places where we have an opening. So movements can work. And that's the state of American democracy right now. It's not about voting. Voting is virtually inconsequential. Where people get together, campaign, work at a grassroots level, that's where power still can lie. It doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it worked in New York, didn't work in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, we have a huge grassroots movement against fracking. The government was not paying attention to it so far. We're going to try to change that in this next administration. But movements are quintessential right now. And you have to ask yourself, okay, so America is not a democracy right now. When were the other times when America wasn't a democracy? Well, when black people didn't have the vote, could we call it a democracy? No. When women didn't have the vote, could we call it a democracy? No. You know, throughout most of the history of the United States, in terms of current definitions, we probably can't call ourselves a democracy. You have to ask yourself, why? What do you do in that case? When in the past, what did you do? And the answer is everything. Mm-hmm. Everything. Music, cinema, movements, lobbying, electoral politics, civil disobedience, nonviolent direct action, everything. Look at what they did with the civil rights movement. They created a whole culture of resistance. That's what we have to do now if we want to have democracy in Europe or in America. That is the situation we're in right now.
Yeah. I also I was reading about the most recent election just in early, back in early November, and I know that in Denton, Texas, which was where fracking started, apparently, they actually did pass a ban on fracking within Denton city limits.
Yes,
and the state sued the state. Yep. Environmental, in big quotation marks, commission, like filed lawsuits against Denton.
And this is happening in Colorado also. Citizens passed bans on fracking at local level, not just a small local level, big cities like Longmont passed bans on fracking, and the state sued them. And that's crazy. You're seeing people declare. But this is a which side are you on moment, right?
Yeah.
Scotland has declared, we want to be on the right side of history. New York has declared, we want to be on the right side of history. France, the Netherlands, Ireland, parts of South Africa, parts of Australia, parts of Colorado, parts of New Mexico. People are having to stand up and be counted right now. And whether, so that's the big issue. And these things are dovetailed with issues of climate change. Because what we're really talking about with fracking is we're talking about the largest expansion of fossil fuel drilling, oil and gas, in history. The Society of Petroleum Engineers, in a leaked PowerPoint presentation, were not shy. They said, we want to drill more wells in the next 10 years than have been drilled in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
That's what their projections are. So what does this mean? This means the fossil fuel industry wants to expand beyond where they ever have, which is why you're seeing this debate happening in Scotland and England and France and Pennsylvania and New York and West Virginia. There are all these new territories that the oil and gas industry wants to open up. They want to keep us addicted. They're trying to keep the renewable energy revolution at bay, and it's our job to bring it about.
Yeah, I don't know if you.
There's a bunch of questions that are coming in here on
Karen Kelly, Josh, how many accidents involving fracking have happened in the USA? I guess that depends on what you mean by accidents, but
well, it's virtually uncountable. I mean, it's countable, but when you're talking about fracking, you're talking about all the parts, right? So, rig explosions, well leakage, injection well leakage, frack trucks falling off the sides of roads, pipelines exploding. You know, there's so many different categories, and most of which are not counted. So let's look at some of these one by one. When you're talking about, let's say, cement casing failure, meaning that these wells are starting to leak. The Society of Petroleum Engineers estimates that currently there are 1.8 million oil and gas wells in the world, and 35% of them are leaking. So what's 35% of 1.8 million? I could get the calculator out and see what it is.
500, 600,000, something like that.
600,000. So there's 600,000 of these gas wells and oil wells leaking. That's all over the world. Those are in the Gulf of Mexico. They're in your backyard. They're in the North Sea. They're wherever. Okay, so that's a rough estimate on legacy wells and how many of them are leaking now. You can extrapolate that towards the future. We know that right now in Pennsylvania, between 8 and 11% of the newly drilled wells in Pennsylvania are leaking. So that's thousands of incidents. That's just the underground part, right? And those are only the new fracking wells. We know that in every area where fracking goes, traffic accidents skyrocket. So these are truck drivers who are being told to drive toxic chemicals down regular roads and huge trucks, falling asleep at the wheel, crashing into people. We see real rates of elevation in accidents on the road. So you can look at that at Food and Water Watch. They have an amazing report on that.
Just very quickly, I've also heard that I think in Texas and probably elsewhere, they're just destroying the roads. I mean,
the roads get pounded in because the roads are not graded in many cases for that kind of activity. Yeah. We also know a good friend of mine named Mike Sorahan at an outfit called Energy Wire. They wanted to find out how much spilling was happening in the United States. What were we spilling? Not pipelines, just spills. There was no national registry for spills in the United States, but they went through, thousands of state records, and they discovered that in 2012 alone, there were 6,000 onshore spills of oil, gas, and fracking wastewater in the United States. Onshore, just in 2012 alone, 6,000. And that had spilled more oil, gas, fracking fluids, and wastewater. They spilled about 16 million gallons, which is 5 or so more million gallons than the Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska. And that's just 1 year, onshore, cumulatively.
Yeah.
So this accidents, like the industry would like you to think that these are just accidents. This was an accident over here. This was a little problem over here. But no, these are statistical probabilities which show the rate of entropy and the rate of destruction of the industry, so much so that you have to realize that this is a perpetual state of spill, a perpetual state of breaking down, a perpetual state of pollution and degradation of the environment that is beyond the point to which they can control it. That is what they call the cost of doing business for them. They have a whole plan whereby the first wells are owned by one company, then they're auctioned off to somebody else, they're auctioned off by somebody else, and finally then they're abandoned, and the public is paying the cost of that legacy contamination. We're all paying it in health. I can go on and on with these types of statistics, but this gives you just a little bit of a glimpse of how dirty and polluting the industry is.
Okay. And on a similar vein, from Peter Heron, asked Josh if he has followed up on the health of the people he spoke to in Gasland. Are they okay?
Yeah, some of them are okay, some of them are not. The mayor of Dish, Texas, whose children were having nosebleeds, he actually moved, and that's in Gasland too. Things are bad when the mayor moves out of town. So the mayor of Dish, they moved their family out, and he had to abdicate the mayoralty of Dish, Texas. And his kids are doing much better. A lot of their asthma cleared up, nosebleeds stopped. The Parr family in Gasland too, they just had a historic settlement They have not moved, but their health, they have to have injections. Their health has not been better. There's all sorts of weirdness there. The Fenton family in Wyoming have not moved. Their health problems continue to get worse. It's really hard. You know, it's very hard to. A lot of the workers. We have a new piece coming out on.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm fascinated about that. I mean, in your thing, I mean, you see a couple of things, but these are just guys who need to feed their families, and you know, they're dirty. Yeah. They don't know what chemicals they're handling.
No, I know. They're not being told. And so I have a new piece coming out very soon. Hopefully, a network will pick it up soon. Called Gas Work on the rate of injury and fatality in the oil and gas field. So you know, it's a mixed bag. Some of the people moved and their health has improved. Some of the people stayed where they are and their conditions worsened. And it's you know, it's scary and it's sad. Terry Greenwood and nobody knows. You know, look, we don't have exact epidemiology to figure out. Oh, this person died of this person died of that, this person died of that. Some of them, you know, we'll never know the answer to that because there's so many factors. Terry Greenwood, who is, you glimpsed him in Gasland Part 2. I put out a thing online on my Vimeo account about him. He died of a brain tumor. You know, there are ongoing health effects, and the real problem is that we don't know. And if you look at some of these studies, the infant mortality rate and the low birth weight, cranial size, these things are being directly affected, scientifically proven, by the chemicals in the oil and gas areas. This is Theo Colborn's work, the late, great Theo Colborn, who just recently passed away, who was one of my great teachers. You can look at the Endocrine Disruption Exchange, tedx.org, her website, to see a cross-listing of all the chemicals involved in the fracking process and their health effects. But we are seeing the kinds of things that we expected when you're talking about these chemicals.
Okay. Ebony Johnson. Hi, Josh, from the UK.
Hi, Ebony. How are you?
From the UK and Frack-Free Lancashire Alliance. Does John have any advice to us in the UK who are battling the government ministers who have vested interests in the fossil fuel industry?
You know, this is a really, really good question. I think you guys have, first of all, you guys have been doing really well. I'm so incredibly impressed by what's been happening in the UK. And I know that you've managed to really severely limit where the plan of fracking is in England. And correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that all the tactics that you've been employing have been exemplary, from the blockades in Balkan, the civil disobedience that's happened there. You know, like I just posted this from Russell Brand. You have to get some of your celebrities, notable people, to come into the equation here, which you've had. We've seen Bianca Jagger. We've seen people who've really gotten involved. So you've had an incredible and exceptional campaign. In Pennsylvania, though, we had a very similar situation, right? You have David Cameron. We had Tom Corbett. A big priority of the fracking movement in Pennsylvania was to get rid of that governor. And we managed to do it. I don't say that fractivists had all the credit, but we had a piece of that. We were part of a progressive coalition to end this incredibly insane government in Pennsylvania. When you have the Cameron government, they're not climate deniers, as far as I understand. They should not be fracking proponents. You have to vigorously develop, I think, a strategy of deploying renewable energy and saying that it's possible, saying that you want it. At the same time as continue the things that you're doing. But try, and I don't know, excuse me, I don't know enough about electoral politics in the UK. You've got to try to get a change of power. You've got to try to get a progressive government back in power.
It's difficult. I mean, I've been following the UK government, and because we have the Labour and Conservatives, which are the biggest parties. On fringe, you have UKIP, which is at least as bad as Conservatives for fossil fuels. I think they're being funded largely to pull the Conservatives even more to the right, especially on things like, they're full of climate change deniers and, wind farm, opponents and all this stuff. And, but the problem is Labour has become so much more pro-business, under Blair, that, I mean, I guess we can hope for it, but there really needs to be, you know, a lot of the more minor parties like, you know, the Welsh National Party and the Scottish National Party, or and these others to form the best outcome in which, because the next election will be in May 7th, the coming this year. Probably the best possible result would be for Labor to get a minority, but not a majority, but then to make a coalition with other progressive governments that can pull them over further to the left on these issues.
I believe that really the bottom line of all of this is that it has to come from the people. All change has always come from the people. And so you're building grassroots power, you're building grassroots strength. And luckily, renewable energy is an aid in that. A lot of renewable energy can be deployed at a grassroots level. It doesn't have to be a huge wind farm that nobody wants. This could be locally sourced geothermal. This can be locally sourced solar. And so a lot of what I'm looking at doing in the future is trying to figure out how to develop that. And we're doing that in the United States. I'm going out on tour again with something called the Solutions Grassroots Tour. So that's solutionsgrassroots.com. I just sent it to you guys. And that's a tour of New York and Pennsylvania to bring renewable energy solutions directly to people in their communities in the same way that we brought Gasland. As I met Ebony at one of the Gasland screenings that I think we had in Lewis. You know, that is a commitment that I have to go out and meet the fracking movement and say, here are now the solutions. It's not just about being against gases. Now it's about being for renewable energy. And we are going to roll out some other initiatives in addition to Solutions Grassroots, which I think will be international. And I can't announce some of those just yet, but I think they're going to be really important and powerful. So stay tuned for that. I think you have to build renewable energy power, build grassroots power at the same time. It's all, you know, what defeats huge corporate interests? It's neighbors talking to neighbors. It's knocking on doors. It's having potluck dinners. It's talking to the person sitting next to you at dinner. It's making sure you're visible in the streets. It's all of those things. Canvassing, that's what matters. We're starting a canvass for renewable energy here in New York. Those are the things that I think will eventually bring about change. But we have to face it. It shouldn't be this hard, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be that corporations have this kind of unprecedented influence in our government. That is a level of challenge that is so great. But you have to admit that it shouldn't have been that hard for the civil rights movement to succeed. It shouldn't have been that hard. These things are common sense to us now for the women's movement to succeed.
Or the abolition of slavery. Yeah, exactly.
This is what it is until the world changes. But I think we're having a huge impact. And with victories in New York and Scotland and France and all these places, I do believe that you will be able to fend off most of this in England. You have to severely limit it right now. And you have to go after a ban. You have to be uncompromising about that. And if that means nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience, that's what it means. If it means media campaigns, it means both of those things at the same time. These are always occurring simultaneously from the bottom up and from the top down.
Another one from Peter Heron. Is there strong evidence to correlate fracking with seismic activity or earthquakes?
Yeah, the short answer to that question is yes. There are a number of scientific studies on that, and I would go for the real backup scientifically on that. I'm typing in a website. It's not the actual website, but it's the name of it. Physicians, scientists, and engineers for healthy energy have cross-listed all of the peer-reviewed scientific papers on fracking. So you can see, you know, groundwater papers here, air pollution papers here, health studies here, earthquakes over here. And there are new papers. There was just a new one that came out on earthquakes not so long ago, a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's been proven that both fracking, the drilling, and the injection of the material, re-injection for waste.
Yeah, because they take the waste and they inject it.
This is mind-boggling and insane.
It's insane. I was thinking. I think there's a lot. I was reading. There's a lot of that going.
Literally sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's say you could never flush your toilet. Instead of what you did was you injected it under the floorboards of your house, and you thought, okay, well, I have a cement house, so it's never going to be a problem, you know, and no upward pressure will ever come up. what we're discovering right now is that injection of liquid toxic wastes, whether they were from the oil industry or from the pharmaceutical industry or any industry, was a really bad idea, because the injection wells themselves leak at the same rates as oil and gas wells. And also, if you pay attention, there are things like hot springs. There's clearly communication between very, very, very deep levels of geology and strata and our underground aquifers that we don't fully understand. And we're seeing that a lot of that injected material, and this is in the trillions and trillions of gallons in the United States, is coming back up. It's a very sad situation where we are forced to test and treat all of our groundwater going forward because we've injected so much toxic waste in the ground in a lot of places. But the other thing that happens with these injection wells is we know that they cause earthquakes. We've seen that in Arkansas, we've seen that in Ohio, we've seen that in Oklahoma, we've seen it in Texas, and you've seen it in Blackpool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll ask a few more questions, and again, if anybody out there in the audience wants to send anything in more.
I had a question for Ebony myself. I wanted to know kind of, and don't give away anything secret here, but what would she suggest as, or any of the fracking campaigners right now, as their next steps and what they think are going to be important?
Okay.
So that was my question for people.
We'll wait a few minutes for the answer. And let's see. How do you? I guess what keeps you going in this? I mean, just from a kind of a personal point of view. I mean, you're someone who has taken this cause so profoundly, and it's honestly, for myself, and I know that I was speaking to my friends earlier. I mean, it's very inspiring to see someone, do something like this, who, never thought about it before. All of a sudden you're affected by it and you're just, on a mission. I mean, and
it's interesting. That's right. Because it keeps being interesting. I mean, it's morphed from just a concern on fracking into a much bigger question of sustainability as a whole, right? Yeah. For the 10 years before doing this, I worked in the theater, and I had a company called International Wow Company, working on plays that had to do with economics, war, and there were so many different topics that we could explore within that general heading.
Yeah.
And then now, the general heading is really about the environment and sustainability, and there's thousands of permutations to that type of work. Mm-hmm. So there's no way you get bored of it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I do feel very strongly that this is one of those fights that's worth giving a decade of your life to, 2 decades of your life to. Yeah. The fight on the climate, the fight on fracking. It's worth it because it is the whole ballgame. If we don't solve this climate problem, it's not only civilization that goes down, it's other species. So my next film is on climate change. It's taken me all over the world to shoot it. I was shooting in the Amazon and Iceland and in Zambia and Africa and Australia, and the South Pacific, across the American West. It's simply the most interesting question that I can think of right now is how are we going to develop strategies to stop or deal with the coming crisis. So that's the thing that it keeps me interested in it. And also, I'm just the kind of person that when I commit myself to a fight, that I want to stay in it. I don't want to leave. And that's a big pain in the ass. It's just one of those things that, you just have to follow through, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are in their 5th and 6th years of their campaigns that are like, my God, we wish we could stop, right? Even in New York, where we just won, we're not going to stop. Now the next phase is, all right, how do we build a sustainable renewable energy system for this state? These are fascinating questions. They're lifelong questions. They're the most important questions they are. And they're all related in the end of the day, right? We're not fighting about the environment when we talk about fracking. We're fighting for democracy itself. When you see the influence of the oil and gas industry on our governments, we're fighting for democracy itself, for the ideas of democracy itself. When we fight for democracy itself, well, what are we doing? We're fighting for the grassroots. We're fighting for independent arts and culture. We're fighting for freedom of expression. We're fighting for all these things that enable artists to be able to do what they do, right? That enable human beings to have human rights. So these are the fundamental questions, and I don't think those ever get really bored. You know, they get more and more intense and more interesting and deep as you go along, I think. So yeah, it's grueling and it's difficult, but I think when you come back to the principles of it, it's more than there's nothing else worth doing when you take a look at the severity of the issues. Everything else pales in comparison. So I feel very lucky to be able to play a small role in this conversation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap this up. But I just want let me see if we've got anything coming here. Does Josh
know what does that mean? EROEI.
I'm not sure what that is.
So the answer would be no. Does Josh know? And there's an what do you call that? Anagram? EROEI for fracking. I don't know what that means. So no, the answer is no.
Okay.
And someone is saying you should mention your crowdfunder.
Yes. I was going to say that at the end, but yes, please, if you appreciate having fantastic guests like Josh Fox, please help Independence Live to survive and thrive, and send in a few bob if you can.
There you go. And good luck to you guys, and thank you. I can't about what's happened in Scotland. I went out, you know, just a small finishing anecdote. When I go out and do my campaigns and Q&As, I often will bring the banjo and play. And lately I've been playing the Star Spangled Banner a lot. But before that, I would go out and play Loch Lomond, which is an adaptation of the Scottish song Loch Lomond by Steve Martin on the banjo, because it was a way of connecting what was going on in Scotland with what was going on in
do you have your banjo?
Well, of course I have a banjo.
Play it. Come on.
I don't know. I've never done that on Skype. All right, we can close that. Hold on. You have to talk because I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. So this is a absolutely beautiful way to finish it. But Josh is going to play Loch Lomond for it. And considering that Loch Lomond was one of the places that they were considering fracking, and that looks much less likely, I think it's a very poignant way to end this delightful evening. And okay, excellent. Excellent.
I don't know if this will work on Skype. It's kind of hard. Wait, one second. It's in the wrong tuning. Keep talking.
Okay. All right. I guess I had the question. Probably won't up.
Can you hear that?
Yeah, I'll let you go, but that sounds so much better than you. I'm sure I'm not the only one clapping.
Little Beethoven's Ninth thrown in there, but you know.
Oh, it's just brilliant, brilliant.
That was the basics. So thank you, Scotland.
Oh God, thank you so much. I'm sure you got a few misty Scotsmen out there after that, and you know, you got me a bit misty on that. But thank you so much for your generosity of time and spirit, and we'll be in touch again soon. And you know, but all the best, and keep at it. And we're fully behind you, and it's nice to it was nice to celebrate that little victory with a song, you know, yesterday.
Awesome. Yes, fantastic, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay,
and carry on.
By far the coolest interview I've ever done, and I've ever seen. That's for sure. So,
thank you, and I hope to be able to visit at some point in the future.
You're always welcome.
All right.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.